How you doing? Jamie Milne here from the JMT MindGym. I hope you're keeping well, and I hope this video finds you well. Today's topic of conversation is about values, human values, your core values. Now, values get misinterpreted a lot. A lot of people, if I ask them, what are your values? What do you value? A lot of times people will reply with common things such as honesty, integrity, happiness, joy, freedom, and things like this, where ultimately these are idealisms and in some cases moral hypocrisies. These are great ideas. These are attributes, these are traits, these are actions or inactions that we do as human beings. But what really underpins values is what's most important to us, what's our highest priority. And our life will generally reflect what we value, and what we value will actually reflect our life. And interestingly enough, it's what we sort of don't value or what's not important or not a priority is what sometimes brings people to me and into our workspace and working with us here at the Mind Gym. It's very common for people to come in and talk about feeling lost or not knowing what their purpose is on this planet, or not, they don't know whether they're coming, going, what they're doing. And sometimes it's the dissatisfaction in their lives, the dissatisfaction, their working environments, their home environments, their social networks and groups and organizations that embody this level of frustration in their lives, and they find that they're hesitating in life. And probably one of the big key indicators of not living life in accordance or in alignment with their values is procrastination. And this is really common. This is a large portion of where the attention in our work goes is with people that are working in industries or vocations that it just doesn't feel right. It agitates them. There's resistance, there's procrastination, there's hesitation, and there's frustration. So I want to introduce you to values today. It's a massive conversation, enormous. If you think about an iceberg, and then we think about and conceptualize the tip of the iceberg, this is like the tip of 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 a very, very big iceberg. But what I'm going to share with you today is enough to create discussion points, stir up a bit of curiosity, and foster this real narrative of wanting to learn about yourself. Values falls into this conversation around self-awareness, personal awareness, and contextual awareness. And self-awareness is the gateway to wisdom. So if we want to live a life that's in harmony with the things that we love and congruent with perhaps our higher purpose and in alignment with the end in mind, then learning what our core values, our drivers are, our deep intrinsic motivators is really important. And I would argue it is a competitive advantage in sport and in business and in leadership. So I'm going to give a lot of preamble on this particular context. So a big preface, lots of information, so I can do my very best to inform you as the viewer, you as the listener, as to what this is all about, where I got my information from, where you can find further research and empirical supported evidence about some of the claims that I'm making on this video. I'm going to also highlight why it's important to know one's values, why it's important to know how we are intrinsically driven. And intrinsic means from within. What are the motivators? What motivates us to do what we do? What gives us our energy in our world? Where do we put our focus? Why do we put our attention and intention and retention in a particular area? And how does that actually benefit us going forward? What you also notice, or may not notice, is I'm not reading from notes. I don't have notes. I don't have a flip chart. I don't have a whiteboard. I don't have somebody with a clipboard or a snapboard or whatever they're called. What I do have though, come here puppy, is my Rottweiler. And this Rottweiler, her name is Sugar, and she is a very wise and all-knowing Rottweiler. So she'll be here just to give me some encouragement every now and then. So I'm going to start from the start. So Aristotle, 2,500 to 3,000 years ago, fostered an idea and a concept. And he talked about the telos. Now, Aristotle was challenged for more than he was supported, but this telos idea and concept has stood the test of time. Now, telos comes from an ancient language, the ancient Greek language, and telos means the end in mind. And Aristotle believed that every living creature on this planet had an end in mind. Example, an acorn. An acorn's telos was to become a tree. Now, every human being has a telos, and every human being has an authentic, genuine expression of what's important to them. And what I mean by that is every human being has a very unique and isolated set of core values. No two people are the same. So if you think about the retina of your eye, your thumbprint, a snowflake, these things are, no two are the same. And values are very much like that. So you might have a particular word that embodies what we value, and that might be similar to someone else, but the content within the context of your value will be completely and utterly different. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is incredible, that we all have this unique set of highest priorities, most important thing, and the stuff that we truly, truly value. No two human beings are the same. And we'll discuss that in a little bit more detail. So Aristotle was all over this. He believed we all had the end in mind, which was this telos. And interestingly enough, when we determine our values, and I'll explain how we do that soon, when we understand what our core values are, that is very much a blueprint, a North Star, coordinates towards what could potentially be the end in mind. See, if you can live a life of true understanding of what our highest values are and be of service to others. Now, whether we like it or not, if you're working at Bunnings, if you're a nurse, if you're working at a cafeteria, if you are a doctor, if you are a plumber, we are of service to others. Now, if you can be of service to others in alignment with your highest core values and be remunerated for it generously, ladies and gentlemen, that is living. That is a life of fulfillment. And what's really cool is I've developed the ability to live in harmony and alignment with my values, be remunerated for it. And what's awesome is when individuals like myself and many, many others do that, going to work is the reward. I'll say that again, like going to work is the reward, because things are so heavily correlated with our values. When I think about reward and daily fulfillment, it's like that excitement of when we go to head to the airport in the morning for an international flight to head off on a holiday, and we've got a spring in our step. Now, majority of the time, that is how I feel going to work. And I know other individuals that are the same. When we're living life in alignment with our core values, we're more adaptable. We're more resilient. We're more mentally tough. We're more anti-fragile. We're more creative because we can roll with the punches, because things are important to us. They're our highest priority, and that gives us a real depth of that tenacity, of that tenacious resolve. When we're not living in alignment with our highest values our perspective narrows. We focus on pain, we focus on the setbacks, the drawbacks, the consequences, and the costs of things. But when we're living right up in alignment with our highest core values, our perspective widens. When the difficult stuff happens, when the tax office is kicking down the door, when people are dissatisfied and disgruntled with what we're doing, our perspective widens. We're able to see the silver linings in the dark clouds. We're able to see the calm in the storm, and we can embrace what's going on in life, and therefore we can grow. And these are the direct benefits of knowing our core values. Now, it's about now you're possibly thinking this is an extraordinary claim. What the fuck is going on here? Now, whenever you hear an extraordinary claim, I would encourage you to look for extraordinary evidence. And I'm going to provide some of that today in this clip. So I'm giving, as I mentioned, quite a lot of preamble about values, but it's really important. And this is what underpins this deeper understanding and this greater depth of self-awareness and personal awareness. So good old Aristotle, he's given us the telos idea and concept. So we've got an end in mind. And from that, interestingly enough, we have in future times leveraged off this idea and concept. In our chromosomes, our DNA, at the end of the chromosome is what we call the telomere, which again has been borrowed from Aristotle's telos. We have at the end of the brain stem, if we look at brain geography, we have the teloncephalon. And if I wasn't recording on my phone, we've got at the end of our hand the telephone. That's possibly one I've made up, but the other two have some substantiating evidence. So Aristotle was all over it. Where people get a little bit caught up, and this I certainly observe in my work, working with high performers, athletes, leaders, business owners, management groups and organizations, is that we find out these values, we find out the end in mind. And you've often heard, sometimes it's good to start with the end in mind. And when we start with the end in mind, we connect the dots back to where we are today. Now, whilst that's got some merit, it's also flawed. We've got to, whilst we might have an end in mind, we've got to collect the dots before we connect the dots. And knowing our values is the gateway to understanding who we are. I am qualified to do psychological profiling, qualified to conduct personality tests. All of those things are so arbitrary, ambiguous, abstract, generalized. You show me a person's values and you are showing me the person. We do not work with clients without knowing their values. Values is one of the first couple of sessions we do with any individual organization or group. Doesn't matter the size. We will dive into their values because it's so important. If somebody doesn't value something and it's not important, then they're not going to be resilient, adaptable, innovative, creative, and they won't be driven. They won't put their attention there, they won't put their intention there, and they won't put their retention there. And I'll share a really quick story with you. Many years ago, I worked just as a strength and conditioning coach, and I was starting to make the transition into the mental performance coaching world. And I was studying with a guy called Dr. John Demartini, who is largely the expert and authority of human behavior, particularly as it correlates with human values. And within this study, I learned about axiology, which is a blend of psychology and philosophy, teleology, the study of human purpose, and of course, behavioral science and the work around values. But I had just started getting back into it. And I'd been working as a strength and conditioning coach for about 12, 13 years. So had a fair bit of depth and experience in time under tension in the industry. And I was working with a lady who I would pop into a morbidly obese category. Absolutely beautiful human being. Very driven. And both of us very focused, very driven. And I worked with her for about a year, and we followed a very cyclic pattern. So when I referred to her being morbidly obese, she was at least a generous 30 to 40 kilos over what I would consider a healthy weight. So we'd sit down, as per usual, we'd set goals, we'd get all excited, we'd get all energized about losing 20 kilos, and we plotted it all out, we had milestones, we had timelines that we smart goaled the fuck out of it. And it's all jotted down there, beautiful. It was a blueprint. It was structured, systemized, and for the large part, we would have the discipline to really do the practical steps and practical obligations of the trainer and the client. We were nailing it, and we'd get, enthusiastically down the pathway. Sometimes it would be 3 weeks, sometimes it would even blow out to about 6 weeks. And we'd meet a couple of times a week, 5 a.m. And this individual would also do some extra training in the gym. We were food logging. When I say we were dialed in, we were turning over every little stone. It was not due to a lack of trying. And anyway, what would happen is we'd get to a point, and then I'd be waiting at the gym, 5 o'clock in the morning. We'd open up, quiet, just waiting. Be like, where is she? Jump on the phone, send a message. Hey, ready to go? How far away are you? Wouldn't hear. She was ghosting me before ghosting was a thing. And this is 7 or 8 years ago. So this is a significant amount of time ago. So I'm getting ghosted before ghosting was a thing. I'm like, what's going on here? Anyway, and then wouldn't answer my calls, wouldn't answer my messages, and I wouldn't hear from her for about a week. Anyway, week would go by, and then I'd get a message or a little voice message, be like, oh, I'm so sorry, like life's just got really full on. You wouldn't believe what's happening. I just haven't been able to cope. It's been really hard. You'll be so disappointed in me. I've undone all the hard work that we had done. And sometimes she would lose up to about 10 kilos. It would go, 10 to 12 kilos, like really significant achievements. Now, this kind of cyclic pattern happened 4 or 5 times. And this is not an exaggeration. This is not an extraordinary claim. This stuff was habitual and cyclic. And what do you think happened every time she would finally come back in through the door? And you guessed it. She would have blossomed out to either back to the starting weight or sometimes an extra little bit of vanilla pudding. So we'd put on a couple of extra kilos. And I was literally pulling my hair out. I was like, wow, we're doing so well. And anyway, I'd started studying human values. And I wasn't really accredited or qualified enough to do a values session. But I remember saying to her, hey, can I be honest with you? I've been doing this study, and there's this stuff on values. And I had shared with her essentially what I had just shared on this video. And I said, is there a chance that I could, would you be open to, I'll have a look at what your values are. Would you be open for that? She said, yeah. No, let's do it. Let's do it while we warm up. Now, what I've come to learn over the years is there's about 9 different ways to determine an individual's values. Now, the one I'm going to share with you today is the most thorough. But back then, this one was a little bit more, not as detailed and not as specific. But I ran her through it, and at this stage, we could determine 10 of her values, 10 of her intrinsic drivers. Now, through this process, I'm going to leave this up to your imagination. Where do you think, out of a list of 10 things, where do you think this individual showed any correlation to health, fitness, wellness, nutrition, anything like that? Out of a scale of 1 to 10, where did it show up, do you think? I'll let you think about this. Have a quick drink. And you would be absolutely correct. It did not show up. So we have about 20 different variables that we're interested in when we're doing this particular type of determining values. And we get interested in the top 10, and then we get even more interested in the top 5 and the top 3. This individual, the only correlation to health and wellness and fitness and stuff like that was, I think it was activity, and that was about 19th, which means there are 18 other things that are a higher priority in this individual's life, more so than her own health. And between you and me, this individual had more chance of flying in the air than achieving any sort of health and fitness goal. Why is this important? Because she didn't value it. It wasn't important enough. It wasn't a priority. But things like her children, her husband, her home, her vocation was, in the terms of the hierarchy, more important, more of a priority, and more of a higher value. Now, does this make her a bad person? No. But what it does do is it means all those internal drivers are going in reverse in relation to health and fitness when we're trying to move forward and achieve weight loss goals and health goals. This is the same with money. This is the same with relationships and family. If something is not a priority or important to an individual, they're going to white knuckle it. This is what underscores a lot of our self-sabotaging cycles, our self-depreciating thoughts, our self-destructive behaviors, because things are not important enough. And hopefully that hits home the importance of values. Whew. If you're still here now, you are very keen and very eager to learn about human values. Now, a lot of the research and a lot of the interesting content in the context of values can be found by an individual, Dr. John Demartini. He has a values determination process on his website, and it's free. And I'd also recommend his book, The Values Factor. That's really good. That's very interesting. More in-depth reading and more specificity around the topic of values. You can study axiology at some universities. You can study teleology, which touches on the philosophy and psychology blend in relation to the topic of values. But I'm going to share with you now John's 13 question values determination process. And as I mentioned, you can do it on his website for free. The only disclaimer with that is it can be a little bit ambiguous. And what I've come to learn and what I practice at the Mind Gym is we look at both sides of values. So values have a conscious representation and they also have an unconscious representation. Now, the unconscious representation, I love it when people say like, oh, it was such a light bulb moment. The unconscious stuff is like a fucking chandelier falling out of the ceiling. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So the values determination questions will provide an insight to the conscious representation of your values. It's very logical, it's very analytical, it's very rational, and it's very specific. And the 13 questions will look for a hierarchy of answers. So they're looking for something that is the most dominant, then less, just slightly less, and then the next one. So it's like a first, second, third. Something will be very dominant, a little less dominant, and then not as dominant. No, the humans have about 10 values, but it's the top 3. The top 3 are really, really influencing your filter system, how you perceive the world, how you act in the world, how you feel in the world. Values are one of the large influencing, dominating things that influence and impact our perspective. So the 13 questions are, and I'm going to go through them quite swiftly. I won't hang around too long on them. If you were working with us, we'd look at this in great detail, but it's very important not to overthink these answers. It's very important to treat them like quick fire, but it's also to get the concept of it, because it can be a little bit confusing when we start off. So the question number 1 is, what do you have in your space the most? Now, space can be defined as distal and proximal from our body. So if I hold my arms out and give them a little wiggle like that, that's anything in this ratio is personal space. Anything outside of that is social space. So my 3 highest core values, now bearing in mind this is just the word, is my business, health of my body and my mind, and education, research, learning, and teaching. So if we look at value number 1 is my business. So right now my phone is within arm's reach. Now my phone is not the value. It's the higher purpose, the higher meaning of my phone is what the value is. So the phone goes everywhere with me, but that's my connection to my clients, my networks, my organizations. Value number 2 is health of my body and my mind. So if I look around, my golf clubs are just behind my chair. I'm drinking a sugar-free, relatively healthy energy drink. My training gear is just behind the chair, slowly rotting and decaying, giving the room a really ambient and somewhat pungent socks and eggs type fragrance. So that's my life reflecting my top 2 values. And third is education, research, learning, and teaching. My laptop is just there. There's another laptop behind me. There's psychological science books. I just reached down and within arm's reach, there's some books there. And that is, again, a reflection of what I value. So look in your world. What's in your space the most? What's around you the most? What's things we value, we take with us, we keep close. Things we don't value end up in the fucking shed, rotting away till next Christmas when you hand it on to Uncle Steve. Question number 2, where are you most focused, reliable, and disciplined in your life? And another way of saying that is, where do you need the least amount of external motivation? So you just look at your life. What's your life demonstrating? Where do you have the most amount of motivation? So you'd answer that. Question 1, question 2, question 3. By the way, these are not in order. When you jump onto John's website, it is documented. It is all in order. I'm just throwing it out there at the moment for the benefit of this video. What energizes you the most is another question. So look in your world. What's energizing you the most? What do you get the most excitement for? What we value energizes us. If somebody asks me to go for a run or train or something like that, I'm up for it. I'm up before most people even wake up in the morning. I've already got the t-shirt, certificate, and the medal around my neck, and I'm done and dusted. I'm a sweaty Betty by the time most people are contemplating the 3rd snooze. And it's because that energizes me and I value it. So where do what energizes you? Where do you invest your time the most? This is another great question. If you look at your calendar, agenda, or diary, what's getting the lion's share of your time? That's another question to ask. Great question. Easily answered. Money. We find money, we invest money, we spend money for things that we value. If we don't value it, we won't spend money on it. Now, some people with this answer get caught out because they're like, oh, it's just mortgage and rent and food. I don't want to put that. But ultimately, that's what your life's demonstrating. Some people don't choose to pay rent. Some people don't want to pay a mortgage. Some people don't invest in food. They invest in Woodstock, bourbon, and Coke and sleep underneath a fucking boardwalk at the beach. Does it make them a bad person? No. It just demonstrates what they value. With these answers, it's really important. So a couple of little disclaimers is to write down what's actually going on in your life. No fantasies. Fantasies always end in nightmares. So we want to look at what's going on in your life today and possibly 2 weeks in the past, max. That's really important. Next question would be internal dialogue. What are the conversations that you're having with yourself the most? Now, bearing in mind, we have 62 to 82,000 thoughts a day. So I felt sorry for the fucking person that had to figure that out. But you're looking at areas. Where are the dominant conversations happening in your mind? Mine are generally relating to business, university, things like that. So where's your internal dialogue going? External dialogue, another question. What are you talking to other people about the most? We will gravitate to conversations that energize us. If you think about a social environment, if I'm in a social environment and people are talking about psychology, mental performance, human performance, I'm going to gravitate to those people. If somebody's talking about Man U and Liverpool playing on the weekend, I'm going to go home and stick needles in my eyes. That I'm not interested. So that's not what my dialogue is going to be about. What do you visualize the most? This is, the imagery. This is a little bit on the fantasy side of things. What are you dreaming about? What are the outcomes, aspirations, things that you could see in the future? And generally they'll be correlated to what we value. That's a good one. Goals. What area do you set your goals in? What area are you generally setting goals in? Some people are not goal-orientated individuals, which fucking baffles me. You've got to have something to aim for. No target, can't aim. Doesn't make sense. But anyway, they're out there. To-do lists classify as goals. So even if you're not a goal-setting Gary, what's the to-do list? What's the bullet points, the checklists, the agendas, the diaries, the timelines, the calendars? What are they correlated with? What's the higher purpose of those? And that's another good question to ask. When we've got an answer, what's the higher purpose of that? Because that's where things are quite interesting. What do you like to learn about? So when you're watching your YouTube clips, podcasts, workshops, books you read, courses, networking, these areas, what do you like to learn about the most? Now, say if somebody says four-wheel driving and camping, then my next question would generally be, well, what's the higher purpose of that? And a lot of the time it's something like freedom or nature, health and wellness. So sometimes it's quite good to ask, well, what's the higher purpose? What's the higher meaning? And that's falling back into love with Aristotle and his telos concept. I'm trying to think if I have missed any, which I possibly have. What inspires you the most? And oftentimes this is connected with a person or a group or a team or an organization. And I'll give you an example. So what inspires you the most? So if I look at my highest value of business, now Dr. John Demartini inspires me. And then if I think, well, what's the higher purpose of that? What is it about him that inspires me? It's his education, it's his business model, and then you see how that sort of integrates with two of my values. So I'm like, yeah, awesome. That's where my inspiration is. So sometimes that helps for you guys if you're following along with this video and starting to jot some stuff down. Now, on completion of these questions, you're going to have a whole heap of content. And what's a really good sign is if we've got congruence. So there's lots of the same answers keep coming up. It means you're actually giving insight and reflecting what's genuinely happening in your life. If it's all over the place and it's a bit of a lolly scramble and there's shit everywhere, you got jelly snakes over there, you got clinkers and Skittles and fucking Maltesers, then you probably got a bit of fantasy happening. What you will possibly have, or not possibly have, you will have, is synonyms. So if I've got health and fitness of my body and my mind as my number 2 value, there'll be things like training gear, there'll be things like water bottle, there'll be things like healthy food, there'll be things like supplements, and these are all synonyms of a higher purpose and higher meaning. Hopefully that makes sense. So in amongst this, we can determine what the 3 highest priorities are in your life, what the 3 most important things are, and essentially what our 3 values are. Now, values are verbs, they're actions, they're doing things. So that's an interesting point. And what you will have is you will have the conscious representation of your values, i.e. you have consciously, cognitively written down and come up with these 3 values, and there will be a hierarchy. Something's going to be really dominant, then there'll be a 2, and then there'll be a 3. Now, sometimes you'll get an equals. Sometimes there's things that you've counted the same. So imagine you've got your paper, you're counting through, it might be circle around this, circle around that. So you're figuring out how many times you've answered the question, and that same thing keeps coming up. And you'll have this little hierarchy. Now, there must be a hierarchy. So say, for example, I've got 2 values, and one is financial freedom and one is health and fitness. And I both got 13. Now, in the human experience, there is no equals. It is a hierarchy. So the best question to ask is really simple. So say I got financial freedom and I've got health and fitness. I would simply ask the question in the context of my life. Is financial freedom more important than health and fitness to me specifically? And then I would think and go, nah, it would be health and fitness, because without that, money doesn't matter. So that's a really good question to ask. Now, I hope I haven't confused you too much. I've given a lot of content, and this video is blown out a little bit longer than what I thought it would. That's okay. But what we've got now is we've got 3 words. So we've got the context of your highest priority, your highest value, what's most important. And what I will share with you in our next video, and comment below if you're interested, is I'm going to share with you how we find out the unconscious drivers. This is the content in the context of your values. And as I mentioned earlier before, this is when a plethora of chandeliers will fall out of the ceiling and we go, what the actual fuck? This is why I do what I do. And when I do it, this is why I make it mean a particular thing. And this is where it gets really, really important and really, really interesting, when we truly understand what's driving us. Which leads me actually finally to the last part of this before I sign off, is where do values come from? Which is a great question. Unless people are informed about human values and our intrinsic drivers, majority of people will say childhood, parents, grandparents, community, society impress these principles and beliefs and values on us, of which historically there was a train of thought, there was a body of thought that was how values are obtained. But what we understand now is values are created in voids. And this is the only way that they can happen. Sometimes, in very rare occasions, we can have a significant emotional event and we can create a value around that. I'll explain what I mean by that. Majority of the time, and almost all of the time, values are created in voids. Now, voids we perceive, keyword perceive, something's missing, something's taken, there's a gap, and we perceive that something is essentially missing. But the universe tells us and demonstrates and shows us that there's always order, symmetry, and proportion. Nothing is ever missing. But we perceive there's something missing, so we create a value. Now, a void can be defined by an unresolved judgment. And that's the best way I could describe it. Now, if I use, in the name of transparency, if I use my values, right, very quickly, value of business. So I grew up in scarcity, well below the poverty line. My mother left when I was only a few months old. I was raised by my dad. We never had any money. We didn't have a car. We had very little food. And so I perceived a lack. I perceived that something was missing. And so I've created a very strong value on making money and ensuring that my important people don't miss out. That's value number one. Value number two, health of my body and my mind. When I left the military, I was in the Navy for 7.5 years. I managed to absolutely obliterate my body and went from a lean, athletic 75 kilos, dripping wet, and under a dim light with an appropriate amount of ambient background music, I was semi-decent. Had abs on abs and biceps and other bits that were that reflected a high level of athleticism. But in 9 months, I went from 75 kilos to 116. I looked like a lovely little banoffee pie, a little brown beige bubble. And I essentially swelled myself up on steak and cheese pies and pints of beer and anything else I could get my hands on that had at least more than 50 grams of sugar in it. So going through that unresolved judgment created a value and a very strong drive to never be like that again. Value number 3 for me, which is education, teaching, research and learning. I left school at 14. So 14, 15. So no school qualifications whatsoever. And so that really basic fundamental education that most people obtain, I never did. And my formal education and accreditation and university pathways started much later in life. And so therefore I have a very strong value on education, learning, teaching and research. So when you have determined what your values are, know that they have come out of a void, just like I explained there. It's important to understand the caveat to that is that it's not a bad thing. We will always have this beautiful, delicate duality, this synergy of the void and the value. It's like a little dance. These two bad boys or bad girls follow each other like a shadow. So don't think like, oh my God, this is overwhelming. The trauma. There's there might be a little bit of trauma, but look at it with curiosity and understanding that these two things exist with each other. This is the duality, this is the synthesis, synergy, equilibrium, equalizer of the void and the value. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a lot. I've given you a lot. And if you followed through this video, you would now have an understanding of your 3 core values. How does this help? Well, step number 2 or video number 2, when we go through the unconscious drivers behind, so the content and the context of your value will get you very much closer to Aristotle's idea and concept of the telos. We're collecting the dots so we can connect the dots. We can start to look, hey, can I step into a career or a pathway that is correlated with my values? And as I mentioned before, without going into masses of detail, where was I going with this? This is the problem with not having notes. But we can start to look at, how do we integrate this into our life? How do we integrate this into our financial side of our life, our vocational, our professional side of our life? Because this is what a fulfilled life looks like. Working in alignment, in harmony, and in congruence with what we value. I am living proof of this. Going through the values process in education about 8 years ago, I was heading down the pathway of becoming a 50-year-old personal trainer and that was going to be owning a gym, and that was going to be my life. And I was actually all right with it. I didn't see a problem with it, but I did have the concern of, I'm aging, and the health and fitness industry is a very young and vibrant industry primarily. And then when I went through my values and realized, holy smoke, I am going down the wrong pathway enthusiastically. I did a quick pivot and then started to move the needle progressively, collect the dots so I could connect them from where I was to where I am now. Now, that didn't happen overnight, but what I did have was I had the information. I'd gathered the information through the values process, and I started there. And I wish that for you. I wish that for you. I wish for you to go to your work every morning like you're going on an international holiday with a fucking spring in your step, because you can almost taste the Aperol spritz as you head into work in the morning. That's actually a terrible example, but you know what I mean. It's all said in jest. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed our first long form YouTube video. It's a long one, but I do sincerely hope it's a beneficial one. If you have any questions, please comment below. If you enjoyed the video, please comment below. If you end up listening to this on Spotify, please like and share. Please share this with your friends. I would love people to subscribe. I'm very driven to start putting these videos out there, and I'm not going to keep any cards close to my chest. I'm going to share everything I know so that you can go out and be the best that you can be and all that you can be every day of the week and 5 times on a Saturday. Look forward to sharing the next video when we unpack the unconscious drivers, the content in the context of your values. Go well. Aroha mai, aroha atu.